divorcee.
To men of the town, she was very charming, very beautiful, just would tell you what you wanted to hear.
He was a sheriff's deputy and a good old boy through and through.
Fine sometimes, quiet sometimes, just an all-around country boy.
It seemed the couple was meant to be. Until one September afternoon brings their romance to a hellish end.
There was a pool of blood.
I didn't know if he was still alive. She was hysterical, screaming.
As detectives investigate the death of one of their own, a dangerous pattern emerges.
And he said, well, I had to take guns from her several times.
He continued to add to his story, depending on who he was talking to. He was inconsistent.
I was blown away. I didn't really know what to think.
But just when detectives think the case is closed, a killer strikes again.
This was a very violent murder and something that the murderer did with his own hands.
Who would do something to an elderly man like this?
I can't wrap my head around it. Who else would do that but somebody who's nothing but pure evil?
Nestled in the center of Columbia County, McNeil, Arkansas is about as small town as you can get.
If you get into any kind of mischief, people will know about it and know about it quickly.
For Josh Bolton and his family, roots run deep.
When people hear the name Bolton, they mainly think of law enforcement. There were three of us. My father was the first, Terry Bolton, and then my Uncle Larry was the second, and then I chose to pursue the field and have a career in law enforcement as well.
On September 15th, 1998, Josh is a 22-year-old police cadet at the local police department.
I just happened to be in the dispatcher's room talking to the dispatcher, and the phone rang, 911 phone rang.
The woman on the other end of the line is frantic.
I could hear the dispatcher say, "Nena, you need to calm."
43-year-old Nena Bolton.
She was very frantic, in fact, and the dispatcher had to tell her, numerous times, "Hey, just calm down, tell me what's going on, tell me what's happened." And that's when the dispatcher looks at me and says, "Nena shot Larry." After a couple of seconds, I realized that she was talking about my Uncle Larry. I was blown away. I didn't really know what to think. And then I hollered at the chief down the hall and told him what was going on.
First responders and law enforcement rush to the couple's trailer. Among them is Artie Talley, the local fire chief and a close friend of 48-year-old Larry Bolton. Inside, he finds Nena, her 18-year-old son Robbie, and Larry.
Larry was laying on the floor in a pool of blood, facing down the hall. And Nena, she was trying to do CPR on him.
The information I had was being relayed from the dispatcher. I didn't know if he was still alive, if he was going to the hospital, what was going on at that time.
Born in 1950, Larry Bolton grew up in rural Columbia County, Arkansas.
Hey, boys, a happy family. We were raised in a church. Chores and church and hunting and fishing was basically our life. He had the same aspirations as everybody growing up in those days. Get married, have a family, get a job.
In 1968, Larry married his high school sweetheart, Mary Sue. The newlyweds relocated to Houston and welcomed a son, Scotty, followed by a daughter, Larry.
Larry was a very hard worker. He always worked. He was just a good provider, a wonderful husband, and a wonderful father. Larry Larry and I moved around a lot, trying to make ends meet, but we did move back to Arkansas.
Back in his home state, Larry followed in his brother's footsteps and began a career in law enforcement.
He worked in the jail for a couple of years and then got promoted to deputy, and was a deputy sheriff.
But after 18 years of marriage and raising a family, the spark between Mary Sue and Larry was gone.
Larry and I divorced, and we just kind of grew apart, and we agreed to separate. The divorce was pretty hard because I was, so used to Larry being my world.
Nearly a decade after his divorce, in the early 90s, Larry started dating a woman named Nena McWilliams. Like the Boltons, Nena's family was well known in McNeil.
She was in the Ward family from McNeil. Her grandfather was the mayor of McNeil.
When Nena was a child, she was the apple of her grandfather's eye.
Ralph loved Nena more than anything in this world. She never wanted for anything.
By the time Nena reached her teenage years, her grandfather wasn't the only man in McNeil who thought Nena was special.
The one thing that stood out about Nena was her jet black hair.
Nena knew how to get men on the hook early, and she used her sexuality to do that.
At 21, Nena caught the eye of 36-year-old Roger McCallie, and the two married in 1977. Their first child, Alan, was born soon after, and in 1980 they welcomed their second child, Robbie. But 5 years later, the couple called it quits.
My parents divorced in '85. I don't have many memories of my father at that age.
The divorce set up a pattern that would continue throughout Nena's life.
Nena was married a multitude of times.
My mother's relationships were pretty sporadic. There was just men around all the time.
Nena Bolton would marry to get supported so that she wouldn't have to work.
When Nena was in between men, she relied on her grandfather's continued devotion to keep a roof over her head.
She never worked. Nena always lived in Ralph Ward's rental properties. He knew my mom's struggles all her life, from her marital problems to just general life problems. He was always a life coach for me, and a lot of times for her.
But when Nena met down-to-earth and gentle Larry Bolton, she felt she'd finally found a man to settle down with for good.
Larry came from a good Christian family, and he was a Southern gentleman.
Nena and Larry had a whirlwind romance, and in 1992, they married.
Out of all the men that she was married to or brought into our life, Larry Bolton, someone who stood tall, strong.
However, when Robbie hit his teenage years, he and his lawman stepfather didn't always see eye to eye.
Larry tried to keep a firm hand on me because McNeil, a crowd of people, was not the greatest kids in the world at that time. We were pretty rough.
In 1993, at 43 years old, Larry retired from the sheriff's department. Nena used her connections with the mayor to help Larry secure a new position with the city.
He was working for the water system in McNeil, so he would have been working for her grandfather.
About a year later, Nena suffered a fall at a grocery store that left her temporarily bedridden.
She had failed over some fruit juice or something that was on the floor, and she won a settlement.
She did receive a $200,000 settlement.
She was pretty well off that time, so everything was getting better.
Nena had stability, both financially and romantically. Just as everything was coming together, it would soon fall apart on the afternoon of September 15th, 1998. Following a desperate 911 call from Nena, first responders find Larry Bolton with a single gunshot wound to the head.
His head was down the hall, his feet was in the living room, his head was in a pool of blood.
First responders take over, but are unable to save Larry.
He didn't have a pulse, he was gone. It just hit you hard, it just like somebody hit you with a sledgehammer. And, you know, it's like, I can't believe this is happening.
I was still trying to process what was going on. Why? Why did it happen?
Coming up. Details emerge about Larry Bolton's final moments.
Robbie heard his mother's voice and heard them arguing, supposedly Larry asking for money.
But could a mother's love be a shield for the real killer?
He was in trouble and Larry was a law enforcement type person. He was running with the wrong people.
He was glad that the son of a bitch was dead.
I was under suspicion. People believe that I shot and killed Larry Bolton.
September 15th, 1998. Investigators in McNeil, Arkansas are on high alert as they race to the crime scene where one of their own, 48-year-old Larry Bolton, has been shot and killed.
I got notified that we were needed in McNeil, that there had been a homicide, and they needed our assistance.
When investigator Glenn Sly arrives, he finds Larry's wife, Nena Bolton, in hysterics as her 18-year-old son, Robbie, tries to comfort her.
At that point in time, she was hysterical. I remember Nena screaming.
Nena is so frenzied that first responders feel she needs immediate medical attention.
She was transported to the hospital to help calm her down and to have her checked up.
With Nena on her way to the hospital in nearby Magnolia, Arkansas, investigator Sly makes an initial survey of the crime scene.
There was a pool of blood and some towels up underneath his head. There was one hole in his right temple, and there was a Diet Coke can that had been overturned. We did find prescription pills around his body as well.
He was shot in the back of the head behind his right ear.
He was just laying there in the hallway like he was asleep.
Aside from Larry's body, there is only one other thing about the scene that catches the investigators' attention.
There was quite a list of medications that were found during the crime scene search, and one empty prescription bottle of Prozac about where Larry was found. So that was kind of unusual.
Before investigator Sly can proceed, a responding officer approaches him and reports that when he arrived on the scene, Robbie handed over a gun.
He'd been given a revolver, .22 revolver from Robbie.
According to Robbie, that gun had been the weapon used to kill his stepfather.
Robbie had given them a weapon and said this is the gun that he had taken from his mother that she had used to shoot Larry.
Investigator Sly quickly pulls Robbie aside for questioning.
I asked him to tell me what had happened, and in the back bedroom, heard something, and he got up.
Robbie claims he emerged from his room and found Nena and Larry arguing in the doorway of their bedroom.
I remember hearing some holler, and I journeyed up the hallway, and I seen Larry leaned up against the wall. He had on a blue shirt.
He overheard his mother say, "I'll give you some more money. I'll write you another check. Just don't hit me. Just don't hit me."
And he looked over his shoulder at me. Then I heard something outside and I walked to the door. And when I got to the door, I heard a gunshot.
He said Larry staggered for a moment before falling into the hallway where we found him.
I did not see her actually shoot Larry. What I did see as I walked by, though, he threw his hand up. I don't know if he was pointing at her or what he was doing. I really can't remember much after that because it's like it's all a blur. Everything slowed way down.
Robbie says that Nena called 911 and gave him the gun.
Artie Talley, I believe, was the first one on the scene. And he was asking me where the gun was, and I went and got the gun and gave it to Artie Talley.
Up until now, investigators have been working on the theory that Larry died in some sort of domestic altercation with his wife. But as investigator Sly begins to interview Robbie, he is struck by the 18-year-old's demeanor.
I tried to just get preliminary information from him. He did not seem overly distraught. He did not seem upset.
Then Robbie makes a comment that takes the investigators aback.
Rob said that he was glad that the son of a bitch was dead. I told him, look, dude, you need to chill out. Don't be saying that.
Though investigators think Robbie's comment could just be hot air, they ask him to submit to a gunshot residue test.
We would test the palms of the hands, the fingers, then we test the backside of the hand and on up the arm.
While officers conduct the test, investigators speak with Larry's friends and former law enforcement colleagues who have gathered at the scene and learn it's no secret that Robbie and Larry didn't get along.
He was in trouble and Larry was a law enforcement type person. He was running with the wrong people and doing things he shouldn't, and Larry would try to correct him. And
Larry had grounded me. He took away television, radio, electronics, things of that nature. Nena would give them back to me, just in spite of him.
Most of the arguments between Larry and Nena were about Robbie and about money and him living there with them and him always being in trouble and just not doing the things that he should do as an adult.
I didn't respect Larry at that point because my mother told me that I did not have to respect Larry Bolton because Larry Bolton was only my stepfather.
Investigators learned that tensions in the household had grown so strong that 3 months earlier, Larry left.
In Larry's goodbye letter to Nena, he told her that he was going to take $750 out of the joint account so that he could start over, and he was going to take the truck and the camper, but that's all that he wanted.
It had gone approximately 3 months. During that time, he made no contact with her. She did not know where he was.
Now investigators need to find out what brought Larry back to McNeil and back to Nena.
We know we have a homicide. We've only got 3 people in the residence. So you know it's one of 2 that's left alive that killed the victim.
The information they were getting at the time was that he had been shot by Nena. At the time, we weren't sure if maybe she wasn't covering for her son, Robbie.
But is Robbie telling the truth or covering his tracks?
Robbie continued to add to his story, depending on who he was talking to. He was inconsistent.
Coming up, detectives learn Nena's side of the story.
Larry Bolton was threatening Nena.
He was angry with her and started pouring pills down her throat.
His words were, "Brother, I just got tired of sleeping with one eye open."
Investigators in McNeil, Arkansas, aren't sure what to believe about the shooting death of former sheriff's deputy Larry Bolton.
Robbie was not Larry's son. He was his stepson. And his mother might be taking the blame for her son to protect them. And we had to at least consider that either.
While they await the results of Robbie's gunshot residue test, investigators visit Magnolia Hospital to check on Nena.
She'd go in and out of hysterics there at the hospital.
While Nena isn't able to talk, her nurses are.
Nena had been sedated at the hospital. She would ask about Larry, and they would remind her that he was deceased. And she would start hollering, oh no, not Larry.
According to the nurses, Nena had given them a play-by-play of what happened just before Larry was killed. Nena said that Larry showed up at the trailer that afternoon, demanding she give him his fair share of her 6-figure personal injury settlement.
Nena had had a settlement from a fall at a grocer. Supposedly Larry was demanding some funds from that.
Larry Bolton was threatening Nena Bolton, physical harm, over writing another check.
Nena told nurses she eventually relented, writing Larry a check for $500. According to Nena, Larry flew into a rage when he saw the amount.
She said that she was hit by Larry, struck by him.
Nena told her nurses after Larry attacked her, he found another way to torture her.
He was angry with her and started pouring pills down her throat. Nena responded that she'd write him another check if he wouldn't hit her anymore.
According to Nena, Larry then told her he was going to the kitchen to get a knife, but as he left their bedroom, Nena reached for her revolver.
I heard a gunshot, and I ran back to my room. And that's when she had shot Larry.
Nena's statements seemed to confirm at least some of the details her son told police the day before. But one element of Nena's account isn't adding up.
We paid close attention to her face and her arms. There was really not any evidence on her face or neck and head of being injured at all.
Not only that, Nena's doctors tell detectives they found no traces of medication in Nena's stomach.
The only pills that were in her stomach were mouth sedatives that were given to her by the Magnolia Hospital staff to calm her down after the incident.
Armed with contradictory evidence, detectives work to find out if there is any truth to ever raise a hand to Nena or to anyone.
This being violent against a woman was against Larry's nature, his character.
Larry never was physical with me. During the whole time that we were married, he was very respectful. He never raised a hand to me.
When investigators speak with Larry's brother Terry, they are surprised to learn that when Larry left Nena 3 months prior to the murder, it was not due to tension over her son Robbie, but rather Larry's fear of Nena.
His words were, "Brother, I just got tired of sleeping with one eye open, and I had to get out of there." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, she was mentally unstable, and I had to take guns from her several times."
Terry also alleges this isn't the first time Nena's made unproven claims about being assaulted. In 1993, Nena called the police on one of Larry's fellow sheriff's deputies.
She made a claim against another deputy sheriff that he had come to her house while Larry was working and in some way assaulted her. After the state police finished their investigation, I called Larry and Nena into my office and made them aware that the investigation was complete and it was unfounded. And at that moment, she jumped up out of the chair and ran downstairs across the street to Larry's car. and she pulled a revolver out of his car and started back across the street. He caught her in the middle of the street and took the gun away from her, put her in the car, and they left. It was pretty obvious to me her intentions were to bring that gun in my office and shoot me.
Terry says Nena's behavior ultimately led Larry to resign from the sheriff's department.
Larry loved working for the Columbia County Sheriff's Office. He loved helping people.
Terry tells police that by the summer of 1998, Larry had enough. He left Nena and went to Texas, keeping his location hidden from her.
She was finally advised by counsel, I believe it was, that in order to find out where he was, she would have to file for divorce.
Terry says Nena did just that. And on September 15th, Larry returned to McNeil, ready to sign the divorce.
Coming back to town, and he had a payroll check that he needed to pick up from the water department, and that Nena had told him that she had all of his stuff packed up waiting for him. My advice was that he not go to that house unless he called the sheriff department and got a deputy to go with him. And he said, I'll be okay.
The more they learn about Nena, the more investigators feel she might just be capable of murder. As investigators begin to put the pieces together, they receive a message from the crime lab.
The gunshot residue test that we did on Robbie was negative. We were able to rule him out.
With Robbie eliminated as a suspect, the investigation points directly to Nena as the shooter, and detectives are not buying her claims of self-defense.
I think the moment of realization finally came to her, and she realized he wasn't coming back, and that's when she snapped.
Just over 24 hours after Larry was murdered, Nena is released from the hospital and placed under arrest.
I just couldn't fathom. I couldn't understand that. Nena shot my uncle, and to this day, I still don't understand that.
Coming up, Nena's family comes to her defense.
Everybody visited her because everybody believed the story that Nena had told about what happened.
And just as one case closes, another horrifying murder shakes the town of McNeil.
He had blood all over his face, all over his hands. It was very aggressive. They made sure he was dead.
In September 1999, 1 year since the murder of Larry Bolton, his estranged wife, Nena Bolton, stands before a judge, facing first-degree murder charges.
She claimed self-defense. He was shot in the back of the head. I don't consider that self-defense. I consider that an execution.
But as her trial gets underway, with the threat of life in prison looming, Nena has a sudden change of heart.
She changed her mind.
To second-degree murder and is sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite her conviction, Nena's family stands behind her.
The family all stuck by her and visited her in prison. They visited her over the telephone, letters.
Even the mayor of McNeil, Nena's grandfather, Ralph Ward, does whatever he can to help his granddaughter.
Ralph Ward strongly defended her in the public.
Ralph Ward was stepping in and getting her a new attorney for an appeal. Ralph Ward was basically bankrolling her being in prison.
Then, in September 2004, after 5 years behind bars, 49-year-old Nena's prayers are answered.
She made parole her first parole board meeting. So she was processed out pretty quick. We picked her up and brought her back to McNeil. She lived on Ralph Ward's property in a mobile home. Ralph Ward is living a couple blocks away in his own residence. Ralph was 83 years old and he just took care of her, paid her bills.
For nearly 2 years, Nena sticks to her routine. That is, until the evening of June 15th, 2006, when a relative of Ralph Ward shows up at his home just after 10 p.m.
One of the family members went over there, the door was cracked open. She walked in and saw him sitting in the chair with blood all over him and just turned around and walked out and called the police.
Within minutes, investigators and first responders arrive to find that the man who served McNeil as mayor for 38 years is dead.
He had blood all over his face, all over his hand. He'd been stabbed 4 times in the chest. It was very aggressive. They made sure he was dead.
This was a very violent murder and something that murderer did with his own hands. An ashtray was taken to bludgeon Ralph Ward, and then he was stabbed multiple times.
Detectives easily rule out robbery as the motive.
We're checking the body out. We find that he's still got jewelry on. He's got his billfold. He's got a $100 bill in it. With the way he had been beaten on the head and the face, plus the stab marks in his chest, it was obvious this person or person wanted Ralph Ward dead. Who would do something to this?
Detectives aren't the only ones who want answers. Outside of the mayor's home, a crowd has formed.
It's someone that everyone in the community knew. And so it drew quite a crowd.
Among them is Ralph's granddaughter, Nena Bolton. She tells investigators that she'd been with Ralph just hours earlier.
Nena Bolton had carried him to get some ice cream in Waldo, brought him home, and she said she saw him walk in the door, and then she went home.
As day breaks, news of Ralph's death begins to spread.
Everybody in McNeil knew Mr. Ward, and they were all concerned, who would want to do this to him.
With all of McNeil determined to find out who killed their beloved mayor, within just 24 hours of the murder, detectives get a solid lead.
Sheriff's office got a call from a female stating that the night of the murder, she overheard 3 people talking about the murder.
The caller gives the names of 2 local women, 19-year-olds Natalie Hutchison and Emily Vaughn. Detectives immediately bring them in for questioning. Initially, both deny knowing anything about Ralph's murder, but under pressure, they begin to waver, starting with Emily.
I think I brought up, well, you could probably be charged with something to do with this murder. That's when she said, okay, I won't tell the truth.
Emily admits that on the night of the murder, they received an unusual call from their friend, a man named Moochie Smith.
Moochie wanted them to get rid of the clothes he had on. Well, they went and picked him up, which at that time, he told them that he had killed Mr. Ward.
Local investigators are familiar with the name Moochie Smith.
Shante Smith, better known as Moochie, was a small-town criminal.
Both Emily and Natalie disclose the location where they dumped the clothes.
They carried the bag of clothes out on one of the county roads by Lake Columbia. They rode with us out to where they threw the bag of clothes out. We picked the clothes up, picked the shoes up, and then the knife was thrown in the lake. We never found the knife.
Detectives arrest Moochie within hours.
And Emily, and they give him up.
Backed into a corner, Moochie quickly cracks. But what he says stuns investigators.
He told me Nena Bolton had come to him, promised him some large sum of money if he would conspire with her to kill Mr. Ward.
Coming up, a calculated plot emerges.
There was a lot of assets there to be gained by him dying.
She used a tool, looked like a tire tool, to cut the window screen.
It was premeditated. She was planning this murder for quite some time.
She is probably the most evil woman that I know of, personally.
27-year-old convicted felon Moochie Smith has just claimed that Nena Bolton hired him to kill her grandfather, 83-year-old Ralph Ward.
She was under the impression that there was some land and mineral rights and oil money and property and vast amounts of family wealth somehow or another that she was going to have access to on the event of Mr. Ward's death.
She said she would collect a large inheritance and she would give Moochie $1 million.
There was a lot of assets there to be gained by him dying.
Investigators quickly learned that Moochie and Nena had a close connection.
Moochie was living next door to Nena, and one thing led to another, and they started a romantic affair.
And according to Moochie, Ralph didn't approve.
Moochie was a convicted felon. She was a convicted felon. They could not be in a relationship without somebody going back on a parole violation.
Ralph had cut Nena's money off. I mean, not giving her money like he used to because he was upset with her.
That's when Moochie says Nena came up with the idea of how to reinstate and even increase her cash flow.
Nena Bolton had set this up with Moochie to kill her grandfather.
On the night of June 15th, Moochie says he and Nena set their plan into motion.
While she had Ralph and Waldo, Moochie was going to get inside the house, which Nena had already cut the window screen. And
returned home, Moochie was waiting.
He attacks him, he hits him with an object, an ashtray. He then attempts to stab him with a knife he retrieved from the kitchen. Plunges a knife into him, causing his death.
Moochie goes back to Nena's house and tells her everything's done. Then he calls Emily and Natalie to come pick up the clothes and get rid of them, and that's when he tells them what he did.
He gives this complete admission, and we go get her. She is imminently to be arrested.
Once in custody, Nena refuses to give a statement.
She'd gone from being completely cooperative. Oh, you got to catch the person that did this. Oh, this is terrible. And the day after the murder, to being, I'm saying nothing.
But as news of her arrest spreads, the residents of McNeil have plenty to say.
Here it is, this woman's gone to prison for killing her estranged husband, and she gets out, and she's done it again. That right there is what boggles the mind. It boggles my mind for sure.
Ralph Ward strongly defended her in the public first murder. And I think it's ironic and a very sad state, but, he was her strongest defender. He was her grandfather. And then she winds up doing away with him also.
This time, detectives and prosecutors are determined to put Nena away for good. But they need more than Moochie's statement to make the charges stick. In his confession, described a unique tool Nena used to cut the screen on Ralph's window.
Moochie described this tool to the police as something and drew a diagram of it.
Nena used a tool, looked like a tire tool, to cut the window screen to get it unlocked so Moochie could get in. They got a search warrant for her car, and when they opened the trunk, this tool was in the back of Nena's car.
Then detectives get more evidence against Nena from an unlikely place, the Arkansas Department of Corrections.
Tanya West was an informant, someone who had been locked up for a time with Nena, and gave us some pretty solid information about
that no one else would have known because things weren't released at that point. So that was how the police verified it was true.
As the evidence piles up against her, Nena begins to feel the heat. In April 2007, 10 months after Ralph Ward's death, Nena's attorneys inform prosecutors that the 51-year-old is ready to plead guilty.
She pled guilty to first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 25 years.
Moochie was found guilty of the murder and the burglary, and he was given 25 years for the murder and 20 years for the burglary.
While Nena's family stood behind her after Larry's murder, they find her second murder conviction harder to swallow.
My mother killed 2 men that took care of her, stayed with her while she was sick, took care of her when she had nothing, and she repaid them by killing them. I don't have a mother anymore. I honestly did not know who my mother was. And there's nothing else to say.
Nena is evil. Probably the most evil woman that I know of. Personally, I can't understand. I can't wrap my head around it. For someone to kill a loved one, let alone your grandfather. I just can't wrap my head around that one. I mean, who else would do that but somebody who was nothing but pure evil? Just evil.
For more information on Snapped, go to oxygen.com.